In this video, we're going to be taking a look at building one of our really popular style benches. We build a lot of this particular style bench. And in this example, the customer has requested a 3-foot bench. So this is going to be a little entryway bench that has a shelf down below. Now, the purpose of the shelf really was to hold a couple of crates. But in this example, he doesn't want the crates. He just wants a bench where he can put his boots and things and kick off his shoes at the end of the day and be able to sit down and put his boots on when he heads out. So at any rate, so we're going in this case, in this example, we are going to be using 2x8s. And the reason I'm using 2x8s is I just happen to have some left over from another project. So all this was kind of just scrap wood I had laying about. So I do have plans available in our Facebook store for this bench. They're just $5, and it will have several different dimensions in there for various different benches as far as what materials we're using. In this case, we're using 2x8, so we'll have all the dimensions to build the same bench out of 2x8s. We also have the same bench where we use a 2x6, another 2x6, and a 2x4 in the middle, and then finally just two 2x6s. So you'll have all the different variations of the benches in those plans. So in this case, we're going to be using two 2x8s, which are 36 inches long. And then for the bottom shelf, we need 2 pieces of 2x8 that is 27 inches long. And then we're going to need some 2x3s here. So 2 pieces that are 16 1/4, that's going to make up our front legs. And an angle needs to be applied to these, a 15-degree angle on each end. And I'll show you that here momentarily. And then these 2 don't get cut at all. These are the 15-inch, so they're just square, no angles. These are our back legs. And then these 2 pieces are our top, what I'm calling leg support, and that will hold our back and front legs together. And then we'll use this as kind of a cleat then to apply the legs to our 2x8 top, all right? And then also we'll be screwing in from the side of our legs into our bottom shelf. So this will all make more sense here in just a moment. So right now what I want to do is I want to add a 45-degree bevel to the end of our leg supports. And then I want to add a 15-degree angle miter on both ends of our front legs. So let me get that done and then I'll come back. All right, moving on to our next step here. So what I've done here is on the 2 16 1/4 inch pieces, I've added a 15-degree miter on both ends. And you can see that that miter is what we call parallel. So it goes this way and then also this way. So when we were talking about parallel miters, that's what we mean. Both of the angle cuts are going the same direction. Okay, so that front leg is gonna stick out like that. Okay, so we've got our 15-degree miters there, and then over here on our 13.5 inch pieces, we have our 45-degree bevel cut there. Okay, and that's just to make it look a little bit better. This will stick out the front end and make it look a little bit better. Now, one thing I did want to point out is you can swap out these 2x3s for 2x4s if you prefer, or if that's just all you have on hand, that's fine. I like to use the 2x3s. They're plenty sturdy and makes for a little bit lighter bench. But you can use 2x4s if you want to. And I've also gone ahead and rounded over our bottom pieces for our shelf. I won't worry about the seat until it's all together. Now, there is one thing that we should point out. Our bottom shelf, these 2 boards need to be held together somehow. And so sometimes I'll do it a couple of different ways. I usually use a fence picket for this, but I'll just take a 1.5 inch or a 2-inch strip of fence picket and hold these 2 pieces, couple of screws. And I still might do that, and probably will. I do have a pocket hole machine, so we could drag that out and drop in a couple of pocket holes, but I think this will be a little bit easier. So just find, I've got a whole big old stack of scrap wood right there. So I have these little strips of wood everywhere. This happens to be 1/2 inch, so I might just cut me a couple of pieces, drop me in a couple of screws, boom, boom. You won't see it. It's so low to the ground on the finished product, you won't see it. This bottom shelf is only going to hold the weight of some shoes or something. So, from that standpoint, it doesn't need to be super, super sturdy. So just one on this side, one on that side, I think would be more than sufficient for the bottom shelf. Okay. You can come in to, maybe 3 inches from both ends and put your little cleat on there. And I think that's good enough. You can definitely use pocket holes if you have those, because you wouldn't see the pocket holes. But to me, doing the cleat might just be a little bit easier than messing with the drilling pocket holes and so forth. Okay. So now what we need to talk about then is, I guess I will go ahead and put these two boards together off camera. So that's done. And then we'll look at how to put our leg pieces together. All right. So I went ahead and just used those cleats like I was talking about. No specific dimension here, just whatever you want to hold these two together. And I just used 2 1 5/8 screws. I did come in 3 inches from the end here on both sides. Okay, so now we have our bottom shelf put together. And so now it's time to work on our legs. All right, so I have our leg laid out basically how we have to put this together. So we have a 15-inch piece here that's going to be flush with the back of our 13.5. Keep in mind that our bevel here is facing down, and then we have the front leg here positioned like it's going to be in the finished product. Now, one thing to keep in mind about our legs, in this layout, the front leg is on the right-hand side, but we're going to need to mirror this. And so we have the same setup, but the front leg needs to be to the left. So we need a right and a left. It can sometimes be confusing, and you make 2 rights or 2 lefts. So just make sure that when you do the one layout, you flip it over for the opposite side. Now, the way I've done it here, if we're going to slide in crates, the inside, what will become the inside of our legs, this will be flush. So that's why we have this kind of overlap here a little bit. Okay. So this is exactly how we want it to go together. Now, there is one other critical dimension, and you're going to want to check your plans depending on exactly what depth bench you're making. Now, because we're using 2 2x8s, the dimension from here to the front tip of our leg is 11.5 inches. And again, you'll have to double check the plans for what that dimension is. You'll have to know that. So what we'll do is we'll just lay it flat. We'll measure over 11.5 inches. We'll scribe a line, and then we'll know right where that front part of our leg is supposed to be. Okay. Now, as far as putting these together, as a general rule of thumb, you've probably seen it in some of our other videos, if we have the ability to use a 3.5-inch screw, then that's what we always use, as long as we have 3.5-inch screws laying around. Could this be put together with 2.5? It could, but it's a sturdier bench if we do it with 3.5. So when we put our top boards of our bench, we're going to use this as a cleat to hold those 2 top boards together. There we have to use 2.5 because our thickness of our material is only 3 inches. Where everywhere else we're going to be using 3.5 inch. Okay. So with that said, let me go ahead and put our 2 leg assemblies together, and then we can move on to our next step. All right, so now we have our leg assemblies together, and you can see that they are mirrored of one another. And you can see here, there's just 2 3.5-inch screws on each leg, just like so. So now we can attach our legs to the 2 top seat boards, so the 36-inch seat boards. So we have our good side of our seat face down, And then what I've done here is I've come in on each end and measured in 2 inches. And then I've gone ahead and scribed a line, and that's where our seat top support will sit on. And you can see what I was talking about earlier, where the interior is flush. So if we did want to add a crate, we didn't want this to be in our way, this little cleat, so that's why it's flush to the inside. So we're going to be using 2.5-inch screws to attach these 2 boards together and attach our legs to the top support there. So let's go ahead and attach our legs, and then we will take a look at what we need to do to attach our shelf. All right, so now we have our legs attached to our 2 seat boards here, and you can see we just have 4 screws, 2.5-inch screws there. And now what we need to do is work on our shelf. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to take my little 4-inch square here, and I'm going to mark a 2-inch mark on each of our legs, and then our shelf will line up to that 2-inch mark. The bottom of our shelf will line up to that 2-inch mark. Now, if all goes well, our shelf will fit in here snugly and kind of hold itself in place. Now, I do have a helper here today, so if necessary, we can hold that shelf in place. Another thing you could do is come down 3.5, right? And then put a little kicker board, just use some brads or staples, and just a little piece of little cleat, it could be 1/2-inch cleat, whatever, that you could set the shelf on, and that will hold the shelf temporarily until you have a chance to come from the outside and put in a couple of screws. So we'll just have to see how it goes. But if you don't have to have that extra step of putting in those little pieces of temporary bracing to hold the shelf in place until you get it screwed in. So we'll just have, like I said, we'll just have to see how it goes. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll deliberately make my bottom shelf a 1/4 inch bigger than it should be, and then I could just spread those legs, just that little bit of tension, and that will hold the shelf in place long enough. And the other thing I should point out too is we're only concerned with the side that we're working on. Okay, so even if this other side is not perfectly in place, that's fine. I usually start with the back leg because our shelf is going to be flush with the back of our leg. Notice that our bench seat is flush also. So I usually start with the back leg, put in 1 screw, come to the other side on the back, put in a screw, do the same thing on the front, and then once I have 1 screw all the way around, then I'll come back in and add that secondary screw. Okay, so while you won't see the process in this video, it is relatively straightforward. So again, I'm just going to mark 2 on each leg, or if you're going to put a little block in, you'd come down 3.5, because then you have 1.5 inch thickness for your bottom shelf, so that would bring you back up to 2. Okay, so that's how the math works there. So at any rate, that's what I'm going to do, get that shelf in place, and then I'll show you what it looks like once the shelf is in place. All right, so now we have our bottom shelf in place there. So you can see I just have 2 3.5-inch screws holding that bottom shelf to our legs. And that is all there is to this project. Now, what's left to do? I like to run a sander over all my screw hole locations, knock off all the burrs. I am going to round over my edges here with my sander as well. Then over here, I'm just going to take a skill saw, because these aren't quite the same length, nip a little bit off there and square them up, and give it all just a little spit and polish with the old orbital sander, make it pretty, and I will show you the finished product here when we get all done. All right, there we have it. That is the finished product. So you can see it looks real good, and the clearance here from the top of our shelf to the bottom is 13 inches, and that can be important. Our standard crate is 12, so that works out real good for us to be able to slide our crates in there. because they're only 12 inches tall. But in this case, the customer said there had to be at least 12.5 inches because that's apparently how tall his boots were. So, so that 13-inch will be work out just fine. Now, when we are sliding crates in here, what we would normally do is put a piece on the outside back here, just maybe, I don't know, 1.5 2 inches tall right there, so that when we slide our crate in, it can only go back so far. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you were gonna put crates in here. Another thing to talk about is you can see here how this bench wobbles a little bit. And that is going to be kind of standard practice anytime you're building chairs, stools, or benches. Most often you're going to have a bit of a wobble there, okay? So what do you do to fix it? Well, in this case, I know it might be a little bit difficult to see in the video, but in this case, the bench is rocking on this axis. So when I push down on this corner, you can see that's where the rock. Now, if I push down on this corner, it doesn't go anywhere, right? So it's rocking on this corner. So what that means is that this leg and this leg, which is the opposite. So right now it's rocking this way. So the opposite legs, one or the other or both, are just a bit tall. And so what we would do is we would sand this leg and we would sand this leg until this didn't do that anymore, okay? Now, that's if we had a perfectly flat reference surface, which in this case, I know that this table is not perfectly flat. It may look flat, but it's not perfectly flat. So normally what I would use is on stools and things, I might use the flatbed of my table saw over there, because we know that that's made out of aluminum and that is flat. The other thing that you could use, and I used to have a piece, I don't right now, but I used to have a big piece of glass, real thick glass, for a coffee table. And glass is a good reference because, you know, glass obviously is nice and flat. If I had a piece of 1/4-inch steel or something like that for a welding table, which I don't have either, I wish I did, then you could, you know, reference off that steel welding table, something you know is perfectly flat. So so in this case, I'm not going to sweat it, but I might tell the customer that if they get really bugged out by that when they get it home, you can get little feet levelers at Home Depot and put a foot leveler on each leg and level it off perfectly that way as well. So that's it for this one. I hope you liked it. I hope you give it a try. And again, the plans for this is in our Facebook store. They're $5. And it has several different dimensions of the bench. And it also shows you how to make the crates if you want the crates to go in there as well.